I'm going to respond to Asia's discussion post about mental health in Chapter 9. I thought this was a really interesting subject, and I thought Asia spoke really well on it. I found her story about Jewish women that came into where she worked and were dealing with feeling out of control in their lives and turning to eating disorders. It was very interesting and a very sad thing to hear. I can only imagine that immigration to a new country could cause you a lot of emotional and mental stress, including stress on your health, anxiety, depression, all of that going with feelings of homesickness, maybe for their home or just for their own customs and what they're familiar to. I could really see that being something that you would have to cope with and feel. I mean, I know when I've gone to new and different places, as great as it can be sometimes, you also miss what you're used to and what you know. I think that would tie into how different cultures in a new place, in a new country, would cope with mental illness and different disorders, because they might be used to dealing with mental health in a certain way from where they're from, and where how we deal with it here might be completely different. I think everybody has some sort of habit that they use to cope, whether it be destructive or not. It could be running, it could be smoking, drinking, doing yoga, eating too much or too little. So I definitely think that if you were immigrating or from a different culture and you were trying to cope, I think that that could come out in some positive ways or some negative ways, which is, I think, ties in with the story Asia told about the young ladies from the Jewish culture feeling like their way of coping was eating disorders. I do agree also that when different cultures move here, they still have their own cultural customs, and it might not mesh with society here, and so that might cause some conflict and some issues like feeling a little anxious or a little depressed. I know where I work, I work at a pool, and so we have a lot of families that cannot wear bathing suits like everybody else wears when they're in the pool. And so the women will come in full body bathing suits, and you can just kind of see a little bit of discomfort and anxiety on their faces the first time that they do, because they probably feel like a lot of eyes are on them. They probably feel a little uncomfortable as they're looking around at the rest of the moms in the class, and the rest of the moms aren't dressed exactly like them. So I can imagine how that makes them feel a little anxious and a little uncomfortable. A person's cultural customs may influence how they handle mental health as well. The book on page 240 suggests that in remote parts of East Malaysia, someone suffering from depression would contact a village medicine man to, quote, remove charms presumably evoked by jealous clans. Obviously, here in the United States, we handle depression completely differently. We look at it as, maybe you go to therapy, you talk to your doctor, you might get on some sort of medicinal treatment, or you might treat it in another way. We certainly don't see it as maybe it was inflicted on you by an outside source. So every culture is going to handle mental illness in a different way. Another point made on page 242 is that in Japan, there is a condition called TKS where people suffer from excessive fear of behaving in a way that will embarrass or offend people, like blushing, emitting odor, staring inappropriately. I never really thought before about the different kinds of mental illnesses or disorders that could exist that I've never heard of and that don't really exist in our society. Or who knows, maybe this does exist in our society and I've just never heard of it before. I think your culture really influences how you look at mental illness. I know, like in my own family, my family members don't really acknowledge mental illness or give it that much credit. My family is very much like suck it up, you'll be fine kind of family. And I know when I was dealing with an anxiety disorder myself, that was a really hard thing for me to cope with. So other cultures and everybody might feel like they're not as supported and not really being heard in that. Kind of an interesting thing, though, is I think mental illness and disorders are a universal concept. And so even if you are just moving here, you're an immigrant, you probably have no idea that the person right next to you might have gone through something similar, might also cope with issues of depression or anxiety. And the book said, concerns about mental health are not commonly associated with childhood. We usually look at mental health as starting in adolescence, and that's when we think of things like obesity, eating disorders, depression, anxiety. I imagine that cultural or mental illnesses are in adolescence are probably a kind of a universal concept, because no matter where you're growing up, adolescence probably still feels like a little bit of an awkward time. And obviously in our society, we deal with bullying a lot, which I think really is why there's a lot of eating disorders and just feeling so anxious and uncomfortable in themselves. So I hope that helped.